Hey, want to know about the first church split? I'll tell you. Here it is. The first church split. These two great pastors, Pastor Barnabas and Pastor Paul. Pastor Barnabas had been appointed by the church at Jerusalem to go and be the senior pastor of this Antioch church. And so the the Pastor Barnabas gets to the church and finds out, goodness gracious, this is a bunch of work. I need help. So he goes and finds this. He remembers this guy named Paul, and he goes and finds Paul, looks for him, hunts him down, finds him, brings him back, and asks him to be his co-pastor, his associate pastor. Okay, get it? Pastor Barnabas, Pastor Paul, pastor, co-pastor, lead pastor, associate pastor. Get it? Well, at any rate, they're both great men, both great pastors. So they're there and they're leading the church together. And, you know, Barnabas, the great, humble man that he is, kind of at some point allowed Paul to be Paul. He allowed Paul to do the work that God had called him. He wasn't insecure about that. This is what I love Barnabas. So Barnabas kind of allows Paul to kind of, you know, slowly kind of take the lead when they're out on their first missionary journey. First, when the writer of Acts is recording when Dr. Luke is recording these these trans these things that are transpiring, then he's recording Barnabas and Paul. And then all of a sudden, at some point, he keeps telling about how they're going out and they're going to the synagogue, because that's the practice when they would go. They would visit these these towns. They would go to the synagogue and try and reason there in the synagogue. But Paul, since he's so trained and so versed and so well read in this Jewish um, she's trained under Gamaliel, for goodness sakes. And so um, he stands up and he starts to do the preaching. And so eventually it ends up being Paul and Barnabas. And when you're reading Acts, you go from Barnabas and Paul to Paul and Barnabas. And so that Barnabas is humble enough to allow that to occur. So what happens is the somewhere along the line there it, this transfer of power occurs. And one of the things that I love, absolutely love about Pastor Barnabas is that he was humble enough to do that. And one thing I love about the Apostle Paul, well, you guys know this. You know I love the Apostle Paul. So one of the things is just that here it is. Paul just can. This guy is so in love with Jesus. He just cannot. He cannot help himself. All he can do is spread. This is all this guy can do is go around and talk about Jesus. you know. And so God bless him. So the church split. The way the church split occurred was that the two of them are out on their journey, their first missionary journey. They have taken it along Barnabas' little cousin, John Mark. John Mark, you might be familiar with John Mark. John Mark is the writer of the Gospel Mark. John Mark is the same kid that we know John Mark from a lot of places in Scripture. He ran naked from the Garden of Gethsemane. He wasn't an eyewitness to Jesus, but you know he was around. We certainly know that he was around. And so this John Mark, halfway through the journey, for some reason, decides, I want to go home. So he abandons Paul and Barnabas. Now, scholars are divided as to why no one really knows why he abandoned the them. We don't know if he was bothered by the fact that his cousin had been replaced. He was no longer the senior pastor. We don't know if he was ill, or maybe he just missed his mama. We don't know. No one knows why he left. But the bottom line is he abandoned them. And so Paul was so bothered by that when they got ready to go on their second missionary journey, Barnabas said, "Okay, and my little cousin's going to join us." And Paul was so adamant that he was not taking John Mark. No way, no how. And so they had such a sharp disagreement about it that they split ways. They had a church split. And Barnabas went off to Asia, went back to Asia, and God led Paul to Europe. And so this church split occurred. If you've ever been through a church split, oh my God, if you've ever been, you know how painful, absolutely painful it is. But the word here is that God can use that pain, and sometimes this is what is necessary. In the case of Paul and Barnabas, had they not split, had that church not split, they needed to split. There were two different pastors. Barnabas was a pastor's pastors. In today's church, Barnabas would be the pastor over pastoral care. He's the one that's going to go and take care of the people's hearts and love them and shepherd them and guide them along. That would be Barnabas's role. Paul's role, on the other hand, was Paul's an evangelist. Paul, hands down, he's gonna go and tell as many people. He's going to tell anybody that will listen. Even if you won't listen, he's still going to tell you about Jesus Christ and the work that was done on the cross. And so that is his job. He may step on a few toes, and that's what he's about. And so they just had two different. Um, they were going in two different directions. And so in their case, their church split was good because had they stayed together, the gospel may have not. Well, the gospel certainly would not have gone to Europe at that time. The gospel, they would have went back to Asia and continued to go and visit the churches that had already served, but had been saved. But Paul went off and was led off to Bithynia. We know the story. Paul wanted to go to Bithynia. We know that story. But he was actually led to Troas, over to Europe. And this guy single-handedly took the gospel to Europe. So, if you're going through a church split or you have been through a church split, take heart, because God may have good work, things in store, and it's God's ways are higher than our ways, certainly. And so, um, be encouraged and know that you're in good company, because the first church split, the Church of Antioch, was the first church split. So.